I'm now joined in the studio by Mr. Alade Adeleke, Acting Executive Director, Nigerian Conservation Council Foundation, to shed more light on Biodiversity Day. Mr. Adeleke, you're welcome to our studio.
Thank you very much.
I know it's a global problem, but what is the rate of biodiversity destruction in Nigeria?
It's actually a global challenge. The biodiversity of any country and totally of the globe is for all of us as human beings. It's for the values of living. Biodiversity in Nigeria has been eroded heavily because of the unsustainable utilization and exploitation due to certain factors. We've lost some species. We've lost part of the ecosystem in some areas. We are beginning to face adverse effect of climate change, and that also contributes more to loss in biodiversity in the future. Biodiversity is defined as the varied forms of life. In whatever way it affects humans, it's about human living. It portends good thing for the future of human living when they are well connected with our life. Because every day, everyone, everybody have one thing or the other he or she has to do with biodiversity.
Okay, are there practices that encourage the biodiversity?
Plenty. There are good practices. There are best practices in biodiversity management. And Nigeria took certain steps in the past in terms of policy. There is still a lot to be done in terms of implementation of these policies, in terms of legislative enforcement, in terms of understanding of our people on the use of resources, and the fact that you need to use resources today and leave them for future generations to use, and for you to benefit from it. I will give examples. For instance, exploitation of non-timber forest products. We all eat ogbono. We know ogbono very well as a soup condiment that is good, used by most people in West Africa, and even exported abroad for our people living abroad. But greed make people to harvest ogbono in a way that is not sustainable. For instance, why cutting down the tree of ogbono? Because you find it to be so productive, and you just cut it down, and that is an example of how greed can make people to unsustainably harvest a product that you can harvest, take from it, and then leave it for future use.
Okay, you did mention legislation. These legislations you talked about, have they been impacted on the way these practices are handled in Nigeria?
Yes, legislation is one way of providing guidelines and laws for people to abide by principles of biodiversity protection. But one, the enforcement has been very, very poor and badly managed, to the extent that areas that are set aside for biodiversity protection are again either utilized for something else, or people go in there and do what is abnormal, and then there is not sufficient penalties to disturb or to stop others from doing the same thing. The national parks were set up, for instance, to protect some part of our biodiversity. Game reserves were set up in certain areas. Some reserved areas as forest reserves were kept just for sustainable use of land. But landscape, we have a broad landscape. We can use some places for agriculture in such a way that the land we use for agriculture can recover, and over time we can use it as for the future. But right now, everywhere is just being used without control. So we need to look at our land use system. We need to look at our water resource use system. We need to look at our even coastal resource use system. So we are beginning to have problems in all these areas, and all are centered on the need for biodiversity and for us, because biodiversity is not only standing on its own. It's standing for the use of the people. It's a value for today, value for tomorrow, and value for the future.
Okay, why is the theme for this year's International Biodiversity Act?
International Biodiversity Day is celebrated annually. It is now more on islands. This year's theme focuses more on islands, and the world environment is now looking at islands as a place where species are much more well protected, because they have a finite area. And when islands are losing species, there is much more danger, because these are areas where when you lose species from island, then it will be difficult. It may be difficult for you to get the species back, because an island is an enclosure, maybe by water, and the focus of global attention this year is about species that are living on island, so that those who have been on the mainland and are lost, the effect on the island will be reduced. So people should focus more on species that are living.
Okay, coming down to Niger
areas
Delta,
like the islands.
it used to be known for its unique biodiversity, but has been badly impacted by pollution. What is the socio-economic implication of that?
Very high. You will realize that a lot of things have happened in the Niger Delta. There have been reports of oil pollution in many areas, affecting utilization for other things like fisheries, affecting agricultural production. And we need to know about the balance of how are we going to be doing exploitation of mineral resources without affecting the biodiversity and the environment where this exploitation is taking place. I believe it has to be there should be a balance of use between exploitation and human resource needs. And livelihood of people are always adversely impacted upon.
Okay, there are efforts to mainstream biodiversity conservation into the activities of oil and gas. To what extent do you think that can impact on sustaining the impact?
I believe the standards for biodiversity protection in the oil and gas areas are becoming coming more frontal now, because over the years we've seen that the standards, the way installations, the way management of resources, the way management of engineering, activities in the areas where oil exploration is taking place needs special attention, especially for the focus on biodiversity.
Okay, one more last before you go. Is there a link between sustainable development and management of biodiversity?
Management of biodiversity is a tonic for sustainable development, because sustaining diversity means you are sustaining life.
Mr. Adeleke, I want to thank you very much for being our guest today.